Good morning. We're just going to give it another moment here to allow everyone to join us. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Kendra Jolly, and I am the Grant Administrator here at the Invasive Species Center. We want to thank you for joining us for our fourth out of 5 optional webinars that we're hosting for the Invasive Species Action Fund. Today's webinar is going to focus on building out your budget, with our 5th and final webinar coming up on Friday, which is going to focus on in-kind contributions. So with going through the budget today, we're not going to be spending a lot of time on in-kind, but you are more than welcome to register and join us Friday to get some more in-depth information on in-kind contributions and how you're able to use those to contribute to your budget. If you have any questions as we're going through today's webinar, please feel free to add them to the Q&A. I will answer as many as we can as we're going through in the chat. And any that we have at the end, we will definitely take a look at and answer those live if we're able to do so. So I'm going to go ahead now and pass things over to our policy manager, Colin Casson, who will be taking us through today's webinar.
Right, great. Thank you, Kendra. Hi again, everybody. Hopefully you're able to join us for one of our first 3 repeat sessions. This is the second type of content, I guess, we're producing. Today's session is focused in on a budget, and really this is a response to what we heard from feedback last year. We have a wide range of applicants. We have everybody who this is their first time submitting a grant, and they're kind of curiously moving through the process. And then we have other organizations and entities that submit grants regularly and are very familiar with building a budget. So some of the feedback we got last year from some of the folks who are newer to this kind of a process was, don't really know how to build this budget out. We know what the work is that needs to be done, and we want to do the work, but the whole process of building the budget is kind of news to us. So we got that question fairly frequently. So what we wanted to do is build an optional session this cycle on ISAF, just to help bring everybody up to the same speed and make sure that we're kind of setting some level, I suppose, through the process this year. So completely optional session. We're going to record today and distribute it on our ISC YouTube channel again, just as we did the first session. And if you weren't able to attend the first session, which was kind of a broad general overview of all things Invasive Species Action Fund, please feel free to check it out on our YouTube channel as well. So with that in mind, it's going to be a quick session. Last time we were really pushing the 30-minute limit. This time around, I think will be probably 20 minutes or so, just kind of a quick budget overview for everybody. So just as a reminder, the Invasive Species Action Fund is really supposed to be on the ground monitoring and management focused on invasive species. And we're very grateful for the support that the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has provided for the last few years of us running this program. As I said before, there's some repeat webinars that we did. We did 3 of the same repeated content, and we've recorded one of those and put it up on the Invasive Species Center's YouTube page since we first did those about a week ago. And we continue to try and improve this program. This is our 2nd year of running it at this scale. We've run microgrants for a number of years now, but the last 2 years is really where we've been able to scale up the investment and create new granting streams for bigger projects. And we look to improve that every single cycle, every time we can. So we appreciate feedback from proponents, from recipients, from everybody throughout the whole process, from application to completion. So any feedback you have along the process, we always welcome to hear it. Kendra's email will be up at the end, but even if you just want to send an email to our info@invasivespeciescenter.ca account, we'd love to take that feedback. And we can't incorporate necessarily everything, but we do our best to incorporate as much as we possibly can. And so this webinar and the how to create in-kind contributions and assess in-kind contributions webinar we have planned on the 22nd of March is going to be a reflection of some of that feedback we got, which we appreciated last year. And so, really, as I said before, the intention of today is quickly to try and level set for everybody, to give everybody the opportunity to understand, some of the thinking behind what makes an eligible expense for a budget, what is an ineligible expense, and how we can get everybody on the same page so that we're really grading applications based on the content alone. So the purpose of the budget, or really just I kind of pulled some of our reviewers from last year to look for tips and tricks that we could relay through this webinar today. And some of the feedback they gave was that the budget helps our reviewers just understand what is the essence of the project. Our reviewers are subject matter experts, so an invasive terrestrial plant application would go to invasive terrestrial plant experts. And some of them have said in the past that they looked at the budget first. Tell me what your budget says, and that's what I'll understand your project priorities to be, and then I'll look at some of the long form answers. So kind of an interesting take on it. And I guess I think that kind of reflects of what is the importance of the budget. Um, and our review team's based, they're looking at these budgets from the feedback I've got here. They're looking at it to figure out how realistic a submitted budget is. So we're not grading based on how inexpensive or cheap somebody's trying to deliver a project. It's really about just how true to what we, our reviewers, anticipate the actual need to be, how true it probably is. So projects that are requesting not enough resources, that are coming in, it seems like, maybe optimistically cheap. Some people say that those can maybe have a higher risk of failure to reach completion on a project. So I'd caution you to make sure that you're thinking about that delicate balance. On the flip side of things, projects that are maybe requesting more resources than they need, those might be reviewed as a little bit too rich for the program budget. So just try and be thoughtful. I think, the best tip I've got is just make sure your budget seems reasonable, and based on your experience managing that project, and I'm sure it'll come out just fine in the wash. And if you're ever in doubt, would encourage you to make use of the couple cells in the budget template that we've got just to provide rationale. And if there's documentation and thought provided and rationale provided, then that's all the reviewers are looking for. So just in terms of the global context, I guess, of why a budget's important, that's the perspective from some of our reviewers. In terms of developing the budget, all applications are obviously required to be submitted with a completed budget. If you've opened up an application in Good Grant so far, you would have seen, I think that's the 5th or 6th tab. So after some of those long form questions that we're looking for, after you've done the initial criteria, 3 or 4 questions, you'll eventually answer some long form questions that just describe the project and the intended outcomes. And then you'll get over to the budget tab, which is a little bit later in it. And really, the purpose of this budget is to identify what are the resources that the proponent is bringing to the table. That could be resources as cash from another grantor, or your organization. It could be resources of in-kind contributions, maybe volunteer hours or existing equipment. And again, more information on how we can suggest people quantify and capture the full extent of what they're bringing to the table, available in our webinar in a couple days. And you put those together in the budget to help our reviewers understand what is the global, not just what are you looking for from the Invasive Species Action Fund, but what is the global package of resources that you think it's going to take to deliver the project in its entirety. And what we're looking for is people to indicate those in kind, be it cash or in kind, in a corresponding table, which I'll show you a mock-up example budget in a second. So from a program level, what we're trying to do is bin together where are those expenditures going across all projects combined. So that's why we do ask people to try and figure out how their items that they're looking for funding for check into budget categories. And so we've provided budget categories for that purpose. So salaries and human resources is one, travel and accommodations is another, professional services. So that might be like an external contractor being hired would be another one. Equipment and supplies purchase, equipment and supplies rental, communication costs, administration being another budget category. And just a note that we do have a hard cap of 10% admin. And then we have another category called other. So if you're finding, geez, we really need this resource to make the project go, we just want to provide a little bit of flexibility there as well in terms of budget categories. And all this information comes directly from the applicant guidelines. So again, if you haven't opened up an application yet, would encourage you to do so as soon as you're able. So log into Good Grants, create an account, and create a new submission. You can create many submissions for ISAF if you want to put in 3 or 4 projects. That's okay too. And then once you've created an application, you're able to download the PDF applicant guidebook within Good Grants itself. And all this information, as I say, is nested within that. So a little bit more information on some of those budget categories. Again, this is all coming straight from the applicant guidebook, so hopefully you've been able to check it out. But if not, just wanted to give you a quick explainer. Salaries and human resources, and how we're defining that are wages and mandatory benefits like MERCs for staff that will be directly involved in the implementation of the project. So this would include wages for project managers that are directly involved in the project implementation. Project oversight or supervision and accounting are excluded from eligible staff costs. So, for example, if you've got kind of a large organization with an executive director, but the executive director is not kind of lending an active hand in the project, that would be deemed as kind of an ineligible expense in terms of a line item for salaries and HR. But if you've got 4 field technicians that are out there doing some giant hogweed control, of course, that would be something that you can itemize out. And would encourage you just to kind of make use of the descriptive cell there to explain, what are you looking for in terms of hourly wage? Some people do it a little bit differently. Some people do a daily rate. Some people do an hourly rate. We're happy with whatever works for you, just as long as there's sufficient detail in explaining how you get there to the end number. Um, and sorry, just as Kendra noted there, would encourage people to use the Q&A function. Happy to address those Q&As as they come in where possible, and also at the end of today as well. Professional services is the second category that we encourage people to think about their expenses within. So professional services to us are third-party costs such as contractor fees that are hired to maybe manage an aquatic plant or a terrestrial plant or forest invasive. It might be a consultant that's being hired to complete a survey. So basically, any external contractor that's doing the work would be an example of a professional service. There's other examples as well, which were found within the guidebook, but that's kind of, I think, the most common one would be we want to hire somebody to do, for example, the example we'll keep revisiting is giant hogweed control. So we don't want to do the work in-house where it's not really a stewardship-friendly activity. Want to hire a contractor to come and do a part of the project or a particularly dense section of work. So that to do a herbicide treatment, let's say, because we don't have licenses and equipment to do that kind of work, no problem. That would be nested within your budget as a kind of professional service or third party expense. Equipment and supplies purchase. So this includes any materials and supplies that are purchased for the implementation of the project. We do ask if you're looking for equipment, just make sure that the justification is there. Just with a fund of this size, especially if it's like a $2,500 project or $10,000 level project, it becomes a little bit difficult to justify larger expenses. So would encourage some thinking between the expense, the equipment and supplies purchase and equipment and supply rental piece. So an example of a good rental opportunity would be, let's say a chipper that's going to be rented for buckthorn control. You only need it for 1 day of the project. That sounds like a great opportunity if that equipment is available for rental locally to get a very economical way of delivering the program. So, or the projects, I should say. So would encourage you to thinking about that expense in a equipment and supplies rental scenario. If we're looking at equipment and supplies purchase, some good examples of that might be the equipment is not available for rent, or maybe we need it for, the vast majority of implementation of the project. That might be, let's say, 20 days. And realistically, at the end point, the cost of renting the equipment, or sorry, of purchasing the equipment and using it every day versus the cost of rental ultimately just becomes an economics conversation where it's just cheaper to purchase outright. So that'd be a scenario where I think purchasing of equipment or supplies would make a lot of sense. And again, that chipper rental scenario would be a rental conversation. So we just encourage you to think about the best and most economical way to do it. I wouldn't say necessarily that I would advise everybody to think about it exclusively in rental. Like if you're the number of times you need that chipper is going to add up to roughly 80% of the cost of purchasing that chipper, maybe and you see, well, we're going to need it next year, or that would add a ton of value on the next site or another project that wasn't an ISAC proposal. That sounds reasonable to me to submit it as a purchase. But just like I say, I think just as long as you're documenting and kind of providing some of that rationale behind your decision making, understanding that the reviewers are really trying to assess projects and stretch that pot of money as far as we can to deliver the highest number of outcomes. Would just encourage you to make your best judgments and make sure that you're providing rationale in any decisions you make. I would encourage you to make your best judgment there. In terms of travel and accommodations, that's another category. So travel and accommodations, some good ideas to include within a budget would include transportation for meetings or events for project staff or contractors, or we talked in the last webinar about the role of volunteers in this. Volunteers are critically important. We just encourage you to think about the volunteers as a conduit and vehicle to get you increased outcome in terms of on the ground impact. But hey, if it takes pizza and donuts and coffee to get them there to bring that workforce in, that's absolutely an eligible expense. So would encourage you to include that within a budget. The one thing I'd like to note though is that funded amounts have to align with the Ontario government's travel, meal, and hospitality expense directive. So there's a link to it in this PowerPoint, but if you just search in any search engine, the Ontario government travel, meal, and hospitality expense directive, the bolded content on the slide, you can pull that document up and you can use that as a good source of kind of key information for travel information. You know, the one thing that keeps coming up that I just wanted to note was mileage expenses. So we do get some projects that determine we don't need a leased vehicle or a rented vehicle, but what we do need is just to cover some mileage to do maybe some travel between sites, some moving of equipment, you know, whatever you have. And so for example, it basically breaks it down if you're not familiar by number of kilometers traveled. So if you're traveling less than 4,000 kilometers, and this is kind of personal vehicle mileage reimbursement, if you're traveling 4,000 kilometers or less, the mileage rate is reimbursed from the province per this directorate at for Southern Ontario, 40 cents a kilometer, for Northern Ontario, 41 cents a kilometer. So would encourage you to make sure that your project is in alignment with that. Understanding that some organizations reimburse mileage at different rates. So, you know, what in terms of where the Invasive Species Action Fund money can go, we do have the cap. We need to be in compliance with the travel, meal, and hospitality expense directive. So, would encourage you to think about your projects with that being the cap, and then perhaps looking to other sources to offset any miles that aren't incurred. Or there's information in the directorate too about renting vehicles too, if that's a more economical choice for the period of work. So let's say there's a project that's going to be happening over an intensive period of a month. There's going to be lots of I don't know, road-based surveys perhaps that are looking for an invasive plant. Maybe giant hogweed or wild parsnip surveys. We need to monitor the county before we're going to do the control activity. You know, maybe renting or leasing a vehicle would be a better choice for that kind of a project. And then feel free to include gas as well as rental fees for the vehicle within your budget. You know, so just being aware of that. I think most of the other information is fairly self-explanatory on this slide. Just I think the big thing to note too in terms of food. So no problem in terms of bringing people out, in terms of the replenishing volunteers, you know, having pizza available. Just obviously the director does itemize out some inappropriate expenditures in terms of food. So things like alcohol are of course not eligible. And then a number of other kind of scenarios. But the scenario being, if you want to create an event that's volunteer led and you need to bring volunteers out with those supplies, no problem at all. Please include them within your budget. If you need to have staff that are traveling farther away from where they normally would be, understand that's absolutely an eligible expense. That's a good expense as well. So please make sure that's nested within your budget as well if you need that to make the project happen. In terms of communications, we got a few questions about what is an eligible communications expense and not last year. So we tried to add a little more detail in the guide this year. ISAF funds under this category are really to be used when no problem having communications as a budget line. But really, we're trying to have people communicate about the project itself, not about education and outreach more broadly for the benefit of education and outreach. Those are important things, but there are other funding mechanisms to address those. Really, ISAF is about on the ground action. So an example here, if you need to host a community volunteer event and you need to get the word out and you want to do a paid ad campaign locally to try and drum up the number of people, or you want to do some signage to promote the event, or maybe do a radio spot to promote the event and bring volunteers out, those are great examples of eligible expenses, good expenses to include within a budget. But if your focus is really just to get the word out about something that happened and that doesn't bring volunteers in, that would be more of a communications expense from education and outreach perspective, not eligible, not the kind of expense we're looking to support within the budget under ISAF this year. So feel free to use communications budget lines to, bring more people out, deliver more on the ground impact, but not so much about communicating the work. Um, admin. So admin is eligible. We have to put a 10% cap on proposals. So that cap is about so if you're asking for $100 from the Invasive Species Action Fund, just for easy math, then 10% of that would be $10. So $10 of your project can go towards administration. And administration, if building a budget is kind of newer to you, is kind of a broad category of things, the miscellaneous small fees, things like postage, courier, photocopying and light printing, office supplies, banking fees associated with the project, little bits and pieces like that we're not looking for you to itemize out in a budget. So there's a 10% admin category. If you don't need the full 10%, no problem. Appreciate it if you don't go for the full 10%, but it's absolutely within the rules to go up to 10%. So no problem. We all need to kind of cover those costs. So this is a good opportunity to do so. So I'd encourage you to make use of the opportunity. Now, so there's a few kind of caveats here. So if you can itemize something out, so for example, if you have a bookkeeper or an administrator fee that you need to kind of have that time and HR component covered, understood, no problem, but just don't have that within admin. That's fair to put as a line item within your budget under salary and HR, but would encourage you not to include that within your 10%. Travel, accommodations, meal expenses, things like that, computers, those are, those kinds of pieces are fair game within a budget, but don't make sure that they're not captured within your admin because you only have 10%. So if you need those other pieces, no problem, but itemize them out in separate budget categories. So other things like legal fees and audit fees or engineering fees, if that's appropriate for your project, any other professional service fee, that's fair if they're required and if you can document why they are required for the project. But again, just make sure that they're itemized out. So those are not admin eligible fees. So make sure that they're kind of lined out individually. This is what in the applicant guidebook a sample budget looks like. We've kind of made a fictitious example of what a project is. So this is a municipality wanting to address all the giant hogweed across 4 municipal parks. And they have a multi-year plan to eradicate giant hogweed. So what they're looking for, they have another funder, which I'll show you in a second, who's contributing some cash to their project, but they're also looking for some in-kind money from ISAF to make the project happen. So that's kind of the overall budget, and I'll show you in a second, just kind of line by line and give a little bit of feedback. So this is what the budget table actually looks like this year because we've gone to this online grant platform. So this will look familiar to you once you've created your a project within Good Grants. So you've got the Start Here tab, eligibility requirements. If you pass those first 4 questions, moved on to applicant information, project description, KPIs, eventually get to budget table towards the end. And so this is what it's going to look like here. And you can save as your work as you go and kind of navigate back and forth through these tabs, as we mentioned last time as well. So as I said before, would recommend you download the applicant guidebook. It's a PDF document that you can download once you've created an application. And there you can have a little bit more information that I've presented on today, but you've got those 5 or 6 different categories there. And that's what you'll see populated down here below. So we've then started to fill out one of these example budget tables here. So adding a little bit more information from the slide you saw before. So what we've done in this is started to say, okay, what would it take, me as the applicant, what would it take for us to deliver this project? Well, we need $500 from ISAF to cover off some additional project coordinator time on the project here. We found from another funder, the Parks and Community Fund, again, just made up. We have $700 coming from them, but that's not quite enough to deliver the project. We need a little bit of a top up here. So we're looking for an extra 20 hours of time at $25 an hour, $500 total from ISAF. That's what our request is here. And we're able to contribute, because I'm a municipality and the position already exists, we're able to add a little bit of our in-kind existing time in here. So we're assessing that at about $1,250. So if you add the existing time I've already got, plus some time that I've got from another funder, plus some time from ISAF, total that up, and sorry, just out of screen here, you get a total for this row. But altogether, that's the only salary and HR costs that I need to deliver this project. Now, what this example doesn't have are things like MERCs built in. So if that's a required expense, absolutely would encourage you just to itemize that out here in this kind of detailed breakdown. So what I might do in that scenario here is do another star, another times, and then maybe times 1.13 if it's 13%, or maybe MERCs are a little bit heavier for organization if it's 15%, something like that. Just whatever is required from your end, as long as it's documented, seems reasonable to me. So just encourage you to put that in, and then that would obviously change the amount of money that you're looking for from ISAF. So basically, would encourage everybody to kind of go through the process here, one line at a time. If you need multiple positions here, if you want to break it down, no problem. That's an easy add to do. We provide you with one salaries and HR line here for the project coordinator, but let's say you need some field technicians as well. Click on the add a row button at the bottom here, and then a row 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 below would start to populate, and then you can just add more here. So you can write salaries and HR, and then you can set a project coordinator. In this cell, you might say field technician. So feel free to keep going that way. And then at the bottom of the budget table here, the nice thing is it takes math out of the equation. So it adds all these ISAF request numbers together here, sums them at the bottom, adds all your proponent contribution cash additions here down at the bottom, and then does the same for the proponent contribution, how you're assessing in-kind numbers, adds them at the bottom. And away we go. We add them all together and we figure out what is the total cost of the project and what is the total cost of funding you're looking for from the Invasive Species Action Fund. At the bottom of this budget tab, just want to note, there's a question that's going to be populated as well that says, will your project be using the services of any third-party organizations or contractors to complete your project? Just a yes or no. So for this example here, will we be, okay, so number 3 here, professional and contractor services. We're looking for a contractor fee to treat, sorry, it's cut off there. But basically we're looking for somebody to go out and treat that giant hogweed. And we expect, because we got a quote last year, let's say it was about $2,000. So we're going to put that number in here. And so I would click yes, because maybe my municipality isn't going to be doing all of or any of perhaps the giant hogweed control. We're going to hire out for the actual physical removal work or chemical treatment. And so if you know who the contractor is, you don't need to have your quote delivered yet. But if you know who that's going to be, would just encourage you to think about, would encourage you to include that within the box that then pops up at the bottom here. So that's the quick budget overview. Tried to go through it as quick as we can. Like I say, the applicant guidebook is going to be your best friend with a little bit more detail than that. But hopefully today's session kind of provided a bit of a level setting opportunity for those who are a little bit more new to it. And Kendra, I think we've got a few questions that I'm seeing there.
Yeah, a couple of questions did come through. I answered what I could while we were going through the webinar. Some I thought would be helpful just to have in the recording for future viewers. So our first question is the purchase of chemical for treatment an eligible expense?
Yes, it is eligible.
Perfect. Shannon, I believe we answered your question. Yes, you can use estimates as part of your budget. The guide says salary costs for full or part-time municipal employees that will be continued to be employed without ISAF funding are not eligible for funding. However, can they be used towards in-kind contributions?
Absolutely. We'll have a little bit more information on Friday's session, but the short answer is yes. And please make sure that they are captured, because that adds a ton of value to your project.
Excellent. And looks like our last question here. If a municipality uses a request for proposal process to select a contractor, how do we include that line, especially given that the contractor may be different than who provides the quotes?
Mm. Yeah, so I think I'm interpreting that question as the who are you writing at the bottom? No problem if you don't know who it is at this time. So let's say in this fictitious example, the municipality knew it was going to be Hogweed Be Gone, because perhaps they're already contracted. That would be a scenario where they already were able to include it. If you want to write unknown at this time, that's okay too. Really, we just want to kind of try and understand um, who's the busiest and where ultimately are some of these funds going. So it's a question that we ask you to give as much detail as you know at the time, but understanding that final decisions on who the contractor may not be made until you receive the money and then you confirm up the agreement with the contractor. So just the best knowledge you have at the time.
Excellent. And I believe that answers all of the questions that we had in the Q&A.
Awesome. Okay. Just as a reminder, everybody, so April 11th is the deadline. You're definitely able to submit more than one project. If you've got a couple projects on your back burner that you'd love to see implemented this year, no problem. And yeah, Kendra is a great resource and always available to talk if you're not sure how to interpret some of these with your specific project in mind. A wonderful resource. So please feel free to reach out to us at any time. But thanks very much, Kendra.
Excellent. Thank you, Colin. And thank you all for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day. And this will be posted to our YouTube page in the coming days. Bye.